Hello, Alamo Drafthouse. My name is David Lowery, and I'm the writer and director of The Green Knight, which is an adaptation of a 700-year-old Arthurian legend called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I was asked to share 5 films that I love and that were essential inspirations during the planning and production of The Green Knight. Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is a visual wonder and is a horror film that is also a love letter to cinema and all of its many splendored possibilities. The film is incredible on a visual level. The incredible production design by Thomas E. Sanders and the costume design by Iko Ishioka are striking from the onset. But even more impressive is the techniques that Coppola used to tell the story. He really just used everything in the kitchen sink and threw it all in a blender to make what I think is one of the most technically accomplished films of his entire career. The movie opened when I was 11 years old, and I was completely obsessed with it, even though my parents wouldn't let me actually go see it. I didn't see it for a number of years later, but by the time I actually saw it, I think I knew it by heart, and it was already one of my favorite movies long before I actually laid eyes on it. The Dark Crystal is a fantasy film directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and it is a film that is completely handmade. It is a Shakespearean epic set on another world that is 100% made by human hands, and then the tactility of it is something that I really have always responded to, more so than any other Jim Henson film. Like I was always a fan of the Muppets, but something about the Dark Crystal, the cohesiveness of that world really spoke to me. And the other thing that really appealed to me about it, and appeals to me now, is the pace. It's a very patient movie. It's a film with grandeur and largesse, but it takes its time, and you really get a sense of the character's journey. And that is something that I thought about a lot when we were making The Green Knight, the sense of, what it means to go on a quest, to go on a journey, to set out into parts unknown. And it's even better when all of those parts are unknown, are sets that were built by people, and all of the characters are puppets that completely feel like they're alive. And as a side note, I highly recommend the Netflix sequel series, Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, which came out while we were shooting Green Knight and was something that we were watching religiously while we were in production. The Passion of Joan of Arc is a film by Carl Theodor Dreyer that it's one of the great silent films of all time. You can watch it with a score, but Dreyer intended it to be seen with no musical accompaniment whatsoever. He just wanted the images to speak for themselves. The most impressive works of cinematic medievalism, in spite of the fact that almost the entire film is told in extreme close-ups of Maria Falconetti's face. And one of the bits of trivia that I love about this movie is that they built these incredible sets of medieval France. They built, no expense was spared in building the sets for this film. And yet Dreyer chose to largely ignore them until the climax of the film, and to tell the story entirely in close-ups. And these close-ups are like no close-ups you've ever seen in cinema. And when we were making The Green Knight, I often, took comfort in the fact that, in spite of the fact that we had built these giant sets ourselves and we're shooting in incredible locations in Ireland, that ultimately what I needed to do was get the camera as close to the actor's face as possible and watch the emotion that was trickling across their visages. And I thought about The Passion of Joan of Arc a lot when I was doing that. Whenever we'd move the camera in for a close-up, I'd think of the legacy of close-ups that was begat by The Passion of Joan of Arc. Marie Antoinette is probably my favorite of Sofia Coppola's films. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. It's very underrated. I've loved it since the moment it came out, and it's one of my favorite period films, not because of its anachronisms, but because the way its anachronisms just fall away. A lot of people talk about the brief shot of Chuck Taylor's, or the musical choices, or the fact that all of the actors are speaking in their accents, whatever those accents may be. And the amazing thing about it is that none of it matters. The story still resonates. It still feels completely authentic. It feels like Coppola is putting us in the shoes of her heroine, and we understand her intimately, in spite of the fact that she is a character whose legacy and history is larger than life. Every choice Coppola makes really brings her down to earth in the most beautiful and human and intimate way possible. I use this movie not so much as a point of inspiration on an aesthetic level, but as a reminder that when you are dealing with history, when you are dealing with the largesse of history, that more important than being historically accurate is being emotionally true. And that is something we carried with us when we were making The Green Knight. And it's one of the things I love the most about what Sofia Coppola did with Marie Antoinette. Ron Howard's Willow was released when I was about 7 years old. And I was already at that point, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and George Lucas was my hero. And so I was there on opening day. And I also had a severe vomit phobia. And 20 minutes into the movie, baby Elora Danan barfs in Burglekutt's face, and I had to flee the theater in terror. I couldn't watch it. I couldn't go back in. So I didn't actually see Willow until I was much older. And yet it had a tremendous impact on me. I had the novelization, I had the soundtrack, I had the book on tape, and I had the toys. It was something that, loomed large all throughout my childhood and adolescence, in spite of the fact that I didn't actually see the movie until I was quite a bit older. I love the technical aspects of this movie, the way in which it was made. It was very state of the art at the time. It has some of the earliest instances of computer generated imagery, but also the merging of the old and the new, the old fashioned visual effects, the stop motion animation, the matte paintings. All of those old fashioned special effects represented an old era of filmmaking at its peak. And it also represents the dawn of a new era of filmmaking, the digital era of filmmaking in its infancy. And both of them are merged in the most masterful way in this film. It's really stunning to behold those two methods of filmmaking merging at this crucial turning point in cinema history. When I first set out to make The Green Knight, one of the progenitors of the entire film was I found all of my old Willow action figures in a box in my closet. And I pulled them out and thought to myself that it would be fun to make a fantasy film like Willow. And here I am 3 years later, having made one. The Green Knight is not exactly like Willow, but it's got some of the same DNA there. And I like to think that there's a little bit of kinship between the two. So those are my 5 guest selects. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll catch up with each of those films as well as with The Green Knight.